Welcome back to Turning Hard Times to Good Times. I'm your host, Jay Taylor, and I'm really happy to have Jeff Deist with me. Jeff is the president of the Mises Institute, an educational organization dedicated to promoting Austrian economics, freedom, and peace. Jeff previously worked as a longtime advisor and chief of staff to Congressman Ron Paul. Jeff is also a tax attorney, having represented high net worth individuals, partnerships, and corporations in a wide variety of tax matters. And his tax career includes a time at two different Big Four accounting firms, specializing in tax issues arising from mergers and acquisitions for private equity firms. And I should mention, just follow Jeff and all that he's doing and what's taking place at the Mises Institute is simply Mises, it's MISIS.org. So I would suggest you folks bookmark that site and go there and learn about what is going on at the Mises Institute. Thanks for joining me, Jeff.
Absolutely. You're welcome, Jay.
We titled today's show America's Past and Future. I guess I'd like to ask you a little bit about, the past and our heritage, what has taken place, what our founding fathers willed for us, and then kind of look at where we are now, 247 years or something like that later. But before we get started, can you tell our listeners who may not be familiar with the Mises Institute why it exists and what it does? I know we've had you on before, but not often enough. And maybe you can just tell people briefly what the Mises Institute is all about.
Oh, boy. Well, I hope what it's all about is educating people, lay people, for the most part, about real economics. Because in our view, there's a huge hole in the economics profession, both the academic side of it and the practicing side of it at places like the Fed. We think the profession is not only not doing much good, it's doing a lot of active harm in the world. And if we sort of dial back and take a little bit higher 50,000-foot view of what economics is supposed to be, well, it's a social science, and it's supposed to help us understand the world. It's supposed to help us create a wealthier and happier and healthier and more prosperous society, right? That's the point. And we lose sight of that in all of our modeling and all of our details and all of our reporting of numbers and looking at CPI and BLS and unemployment and this and that. We lose sight of the big picture that economics is supposed to help us understand and thereby improve the world. I don't think it's doing that. So we exist as a resource for lay people to come and understand what, in my very biased opinion, is real economics.
Real economics, Austrian economics, named your Mises Institute, named after the great Austrian economist Ludwig von Mises. Maybe just share with our listeners a little bit the philosophy or what Austrian economics is.
Well, it really represents a couple of competing strands which came out of the 1800s and into the 1900s. Classical economics had some holes in it. It didn't particularly understand value. It didn't particularly understand money. It didn't particularly understand marginalism. And I'm sure most of your listeners will know what I mean by that. So some various strands fought over improving upon Adam Smith and the classical economists. And this took various forms. There was a German historical school which said, gee whiz, almost everything we know is just from history. And then there was a real positivist school that said, everything has to be tested empirically, just like the physical sciences. And then, of course, there was Karl Marx came along. Then, of course, later in the 1930s, John Maynard Keynes came along. So the Austrian school became sort of put off to the side relative to Keynes, who really, to be fair, took almost all the oxygen out of the room in the 1930s. So ever since then, we've been fighting a battle to remind people that a healthy economy starts with production. You have to have profits in order to accumulate capital, in order to reinvest in CapEx in a business, in order to produce goods and services more efficiently, which is to say more cheaply, in order to make them available to more and more average people. Okay, we've swallowed this idea from Keynes and from others that everything is about consumption. The way to prosperity is to stimulate people to want to go out and get more stuff. And we do that either through monetary policy or fiscal policy. But that's just erroneous. More money and credit doesn't mean new goods and services come online. But what more money and credit does do is create dislocations and malinvestment in society. It also tends to benefit some certain people who are closest to that new money, we might say. So the Austrian school is really an attempt to reassert reality. Again, I'm biased. I'm a big believer that the Austrians are right. It's an attempt to reassert reality and to get us back to a focus on what really makes for prosperity rather than this sort of juiced up steroid era idea we have today.
Yeah, for sure. Just print money and pump it into the system and stimulate the demand side, and everything is going to be honky-dory. Never worry about the supply side. I think, well, you mentioned that it benefits some people. Is that maybe the reason why you said that Keynes took all the oxygen out of the room back in the 1930s? I would suggest that the oxygen is still largely out of the room now, given the fact that I think virtually every single economist, and there must be more than 100 of them at the Federal Reserve, are all Keynesians, I believe. I mean, I don't suppose there's a chance that there's even one Austrian school economist there.
Well, I suspect most of them would tell you that they don't have any ideological persuasion, and that's part and parcel of their education. In other words, they have been taught and strongly believe. Most of them don't know much about the history of economic thought. They haven't really studied the profession of economics in much depth. But I think they would tell you they are not ideological. They're just looking at the data. They're just responding to data. They would say data, data, data all day long, which is in and of itself, of course, basically an ideology. That says that the only way we can understand the world is through
numbers.
Is through numbers, and that theory can never guide us. Well, I think there's some real problems with that. So, but to be fair, I think your average Fed economist who probably went to some place like Oxford or Cambridge or Harvard or Stanford or Wharton would tell you, look, I'm not ideological. I'm a scientist.
Mm-hmm. Right. But the whole idea of, the upward sloping supply curve and the downward sloping demand curve, are the other way around. Now I'm even confused. But anyway, the idea that, as you produce more, the prices will go down. If you have more money in your pockets with the demand, the shifting of the curve and then along the curve, these are theories that are actually practical. It's the way people live their lives. Why could Keynes not see the need for the supply side of the economy as well as the demand side? Why was he blinded?
Well, general theory is it's a tough book. It's hard to grapple with. And to be fair, I think a lot of Keynesians today actually advocate things which Keynes himself would not. In other words, he certainly saw limits on what government policy could do that I suspect a lot of modern economists don't see. In other words, they think we can basically just engineer prosperity using monetary or fiscal stimulus. I think a lot of them really believe that. I mean, at least within reason. They would say we're so far below capacity that we don't have to worry about that. We can just create unlimited stimulus at the the fiscal side with the federal government or the monetary side with the Fed, because we don't even have to worry about inflation, these other things.
Yeah.
So Keynes was more circumspect than his modern adherents. Yeah. But the idea that there is slack in markets, oftentimes the idea that there is market failure, both of those I would personally dispute, I think are loom large in Keynesianism. And so the idea is that government or central banks have to come along and save the patient when the patient's dying. And so I think that's the general thrust of it.
Yeah. And so the Federal Reserve goes in there and drives interest rates down by pumping money in the system. And so you have people investing in things that otherwise, if there was a true market rate, wouldn't be viable. And now we're seeing the repercussions of a lot of that, of course, with some of the cryptos. And every time the interest rates go up, all these tech stocks tend to get, the ones that aren't making any money anyway, tend to get slaughtered in the market because they're not viable businesses. And you can only see that when you have a true market rate of interest. So it's just hard for me to understand why people can't see what seems so obvious, the malinvestment that you talked about, for example. But Jeff, this is economics, which is just part of America. The whole idea of why America was formed to start with. Could you talk a little bit about why people were willing to in the 1600s or whenever, to cross the Atlantic, risk their lives to come over here was tough. It was nothing here. Why did people come to America to start with, and what were they looking for? It seems to me, was it just the kind of monetary things that we're looking for, or was there something more than that?
Well, Jay, that's a tough question because there's the kindergarten Disney version of the American founding, and then there's the real version of the American founding, and now there is this third version, which the left purports to adhere to today, which is that everything about America from its very founding was terrible, racist, colonialist, genocidal, etc. So I'll stick with the somewhat bowdlerized Rothbard version of history, conceived in Liberty. Was his big 5-volume history of the colonial period in the United States, which is what we can call America. And look, I do think that there were very positive and beneficial animating impulses behind the creation of this country. I do think that a lot of American colonialists, not all, but I think a lot of them really did want to live more freely than they might otherwise under King George or someone else in Europe. And I do think that the idea of the Declaration of Independence was a noble. The idea that really governments prior to that, whether they lived up to it or not, hadn't really attempted to recognize formally the sanctity of the individual. I think the American Revolution was largely, not entirely, of course, because a lot of people got killed, a lot of people got hurt. It was largely a salutary thing for those of us who are here today. In the U.S. And so, but surely if it was fought over anything, it was from the idea that the state or the king or the monarch would have omniscient and unlimited power in society. In other words, the idea that we would have a truly constitutionally limited government and that we would come together in a very loose confederation of these United States. Anything that applies the subsidiarity principle and a healthy degree of federalism in order to have, sovereignty closer to home, I think is a good thing. So overall, I would say compared to what we have today, the American founding and the American Constitution were, and certainly the American Declaration of Independence were very fine documents. And I support them in that sense.
Yeah, the idea that the power was supposed to be from the bottom up, the people that ran the president, the legislatures were supposed to derive their power from the will of the populace, from the people, right? And is there any in history any other nation that had this concept of power from the bottom up that you can think of it?
I mean, you can certainly find philosophical justification for a more libertarian worldview well prior to the founding period of the United States. You can find that all the way back in Lao Tzu and in Asia. But no, I think that was basically a radical revolutionary concept at the time, coming out of monarchical Europe and particularly England. And so the idea that you could have bottom up rule or power vested in people, I mean, that's pretty fraught. It is a radical idea. Whether it can be maintained in practice, the answer has generally been no, because average people, generally don't want to do the work involved to guard against excesses from government. So I would say it was a great idea. It's been perhaps badly or improperly executed, but that's not the fault of the design of it.
Well, what about? People don't understand. They don't want to wear. I think it was Thomas Jefferson said the price of liberty is eternal vigilance. It means that people have to care and know. And initially, of course, we had senators that were not elected. They were appointed by the states, I guess, by the governors, or anyway, the states decided who their two senators would be. But the idea that the sparsely populated states would also have two senators, as many as New York and California would have, was designed to protect the minorities or people that live in areas that are less densely populated, right?
Yes.
People don't understand that now.
Well, there are several undemocratic or even anti-democratic mechanisms
Mm-hmm.
in our constitutional framework. One, you just mentioned, 2 senators per state. Rhode Island, California both have 2 senators. Rhode Island's the size smaller than most counties in Texas. Okay, so that's anti-democratic. The First Amendment is anti-democratic. It says regardless of how popular or unpopular your speech is, you have a right to it, even if 99.9% of Americans disagree with you. The Electoral College itself, winner take all by state, by a mix of Senate representation and then congressional representation. I mean, yes, that absolutely sways some power to the less populated states in terms of each individual voter's power in that state. So, yeah, I mean, the idea that we're a democracy, well, okay, but we're supposed to be a republic, there's actually a constitutional republic, and there's actually some pretty serious differences in outcomes. So when you hear this political blather about it, we're a democracy or democracy's in trouble, or whatever, you just have to view that in terms of current politics. That's just a battle for current political supremacy. That's not based on any sort of actual appeal to the mechanisms of the founding documents. I mean, that's all just complete trash on the part of our politicians.
Right. And the 3 branches of government, of course, were meant to be equal in power and to hold each other in check, right? So that now we have at least one party that wants to get rid of the Supreme Court and get rid of the judiciary, essentially, right? I'm not sure that both parties wouldn't do it if they thought they could gain power. I don't think one party is better than the other when it comes to power mongering, but I mean that's another case, and what's democratic? Well, I don't know what your thoughts are. It seems to me, I mean, they want to get rid of that and add some states that might give the balance of power. It seems to me everything that's going on now is going against this idea of liberty for the individual.
Yeah, I think that's true. I think almost everything you hear about the Supreme Court, for example, is just a cynical political play. Mm-hmm. If Hillary Clinton had won in 2016 and appointed 3 new justices during her 4 years, I don't think we'd be seeing these constant attacks on the Supreme Court from the progressive media at places like Slate or Salon or Jacobin, to put it mildly, right? I mean, we all get this. This is all just transparent politics. And look, politics is natural. There's always a human tendency towards politicking, whether that's in a family, in a corporation, any organization is going to have its politics. But the whole point of this federalist system, this whole point was to make sure that politics wouldn't matter so much in America, that it wasn't, that the central organizing principle of the new American colonies was not the U.S. federal government. Mm-hmm. And that's where we failed. When you say there used to be 3 branches of government, well, in the 20th century, the executive branch wildly overtook the other 2, wildly. Mm-hmm. And so that's where we are now. We're not even the president is so powerful, but rather these permanent bureaucratic administrative agencies, 90% of which don't change as administrations come and go, the vast majority of whom are very well protected by federal unions, very well paid, been working from home in their jammies throughout COVID, I might add. Mm-hmm. That's the real government. That is, when we talk about the government, that's really who it is. It's not the congressman or congresswoman you send up there. It's not even Clarence Thomas or Ruth Bader Ginsburg. When we say the government, we really mostly mean the federal administrative agency. So that's where the growth and the entrenchment and the real usurpation of that constitutional balance has occurred.
Yeah, the deep state, which Mr. Trump talked about, the deep state now, was laughed at, but then we had Senator Schumer talking about the CIA has 6 ways a Sunday to get back at you. He told Mr. Trump, "You better shut your mouth. You better shut up, buddy, and or the CIA is going to get you." And somebody certainly got him. There's no doubt about that. But well, Jeff, we're just about out of time here, and I noticed there's so many good things that. There was one thing I wanted to ask you. I mean, Twitter's in the news these days. I see that you just had a podcast, I believe. You interviewed the economist at the Mises Institute, Robert Murphy, about the bad economics of Twitter. Did you see any hope that Twitter can, I don't think save us is too strong a word, but can actually moderate things maybe?
Well, I certainly see some hope that it could be a content neutral and fair and unbiased platform. I'm not so sure it can make money while doing that. So,
Yeah.
but that's fortunately not on my dime. That's on poor Mr. Musk.
Poor, poor Mr. Musk, right? Yeah. So, Jeff, just in closing, then, I guess any quick advice for people other than to go to the Mises Institute and absorb all the good things, that intellectual things that are there?
Come to Twitter. Find me at Jeff Deist, JEFFDEIST, and send me a message, and I'll send you Per Byland's new book, which is a short primer on everything you need to know about the economy. So come
good.
follow me.
Oh, well, that maybe should have you back to talk about that sometime.
Certainly.
What is it? The book is what again?
It is called How to Think About the Economy by Per Byland, who's a Swede at Oklahoma State University, who is one of our senior fellows.
Wonderful. Okay. Very good. Well, thank you so much, Jeff, for being with us today, and we'll have to leave it go at that. Get you back another day sometime.
Thank you, Jay.